All right, it wasn't a police shooting that inspired the meltdown, the chaos. It was spring break. The mayor of Miami Beach declaring a state of emergency over the weekend.
We can't endure this anymore. We just simply can't. This isn't your father's or mother's spring break. This is something wholly different.
What is driving the lawlessness and the breakdown of the moral order in society? Now, I've got a poll question for you. And before I bring my next guest on and we have this conversation, I want you to participate in this poll. Now, all you need to do is text the word poll, P-O-L-L, to 67742. That's 67742, the word poll. You'll get a text back that will give you the poll question. Here it is. What do you believe is the most significant contributing factor to the violence and lawlessness that is causing leaders like the mayor of Miami Beach to sound the alarm? Is it guns, lack of job opportunities, lack of educational opportunities, a loss of national morality built upon religion? Is it COVID-19 pandemic, or is it something else? Text the word poll to 67742 and let me know what you think. Joining me now to discuss this is Jason Johnson, who served as a law enforcement officer and executive for more than 20 years before joining the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund as its president. Jason, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Good to be with you, Tony.
So, amid this rise in crime, I mean, we've seen violent crime has increased over the last 2 years, homicides. In fact, I was just reading today in your former city where you were deputy superintendent in Baltimore, I believe, gun violence over the weekend. More concern there. What's driving this? What are you hearing on the ground from officers?
Well, it's a combination of two things fundamentally, and this is true in many cities across America right now. It's a demoralization and disempowerment of police in the wake of what I think most people consider unfair criticism and being unfairly maligned in the wake of the death of George Floyd. But also it's equally important is the election of social justice-oriented prosecutors in so many cities, including Baltimore, but also in Manhattan and in Los Angeles and Austin and Chicago and in many, many other cities that are averse to prosecuting criminals. And therefore, there's an atmosphere of permissiveness and lawlessness that there won't be any consequences or accountability. And that's really the basis upon which this crisis we're in is fixed.
Yeah, I clearly think that is true. When you look at what happened, and we talked about this, you were on the program when we were looking at what was taking place in the summer of 2020, where there was the rioting in city after city after the shooting. You made reference to George Floyd. But here in Miami Beach, there was no shooting by a police officer. There was nothing to spark outrage. It's just this meltdown of civility and moral order, where there were shootings periodically over the weekend, disregard for law enforcement. It's clearly being fed, as you said, by this disregard for law enforcement and permissive prosecutors. But there seems to be even more here. And I think we're at a tipping point that could be very dangerous for society as a whole.
Well, I certainly agree, Tony. I think it's become part of the culture. It's not. It does not require any controversial police-involved incident to precipitate this kind of lawlessness. I think there's an understanding that police will be inclined to underreact because of the political environment, that the risk of an arrest, the risk of certainly of incarceration is low for all the reasons that I stated. And it's built into the culture at this point. It's extraordinarily difficult now for law enforcement to come in and do a reestablish order. It's going to take more than that. Even if we can get that, which will be difficult enough, it's going to take more than that to return our culture to more of a law and order environment, particularly in the cities. And what's more, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to attract highly qualified men and women to enter the law enforcement profession. So we see, law enforcement agencies across the country, including Miami, by the way, that are understaffed and their morale is low. And they're being told explicitly and implicitly that they should restrain themselves from proactively enforcing the law and only react when a crime has actually been committed.
And I think you make a really good point that I think people need to understand. This doesn't turn around overnight. Although we saw the manifestation of this lawlessness on the streets and we saw the call to defund law enforcement, that sent a message, which I think is going to have a lasting effect, as you said, not only upon the law enforcement community that feels betrayed by their elected leadership, but I think to the American people as a whole. You know, President Biden, in his State of the Union address this year, said we should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police with the resources and training they need to protect our communities. And that sounds good, but a lot of the damage has already been done. How does this party that's in control right now, that has really embraced the defund the police mantra, how do they work back from this?
Well, it's difficult, and the president's choice of words was he very carefully chose his words, where he's talking about funding and defunding. All along, I guess to President Biden's credit, he has rejected the idea of actually removing funding from law enforcement. However, he has embraced the idea of demoralizing and disempowering law enforcement, just to fall in line with what the current ultra progressive left wants. And in fact, within his own administration, has mistreated federal law enforcement to the point where, in one case, several United States Marshals were sued in connection with their involvement in preventing and trying to restore order in Portland and during the Trump administration, where the Department of Justice, the Biden Department of Justice, isn't even providing legal representation to four United States Marshals, which is really an unprecedented move. And it really shows you where the administration actually stands when it comes to supporting law enforcement, federal law enforcement. Yeah. And to say that he's against defunding just doesn't tell the whole story. It's kind of a way of acting like you're supporting law enforcement when in fact you really are not.
Well, it's kind of like drilling for oil, but not being for drilling for oil too. But that's another story. Hold that thought, because I want to put out this poll question again. Text the word poll to 67742. And you'll get a link to the question: what do you believe is the most significant contributing factor to the violence and lawlessness that is causing leaders like the mayor of Miami Beach to sound the alarm? So text the word poll, P-O-L-L, to 67742 and take that poll question. Jason, as a former law enforcement officer, I served in law enforcement, and I know you spent 20 years in the law enforcement field. I don't think people understand the significance of what you were describing earlier when your administration, whether it's the higher ranks of the law enforcement department you're with, or whether it is the city leadership or the state leadership, or as you were just describing, the marshals, the federal leadership, that when you do your job, they don't have your back. And if you get in trouble or something happens, you're on your own. And you think about this, law enforcement officers are not, the pay is not great. It's often, you've got a retirement, but sometimes that's on the line, and you can get hurt. You can be out of a job. And if you don't feel like you have the confidence of knowing that your department is going to back you up, it leads to what you just described earlier at the beginning of our discussion. And that is, you back down, you don't engage, and the criminals rule the day.
Law enforcement officers, a significant portion of their work is done based on discretion. They make observations of criminal activity, and then they, based on their discretion, have to enforce the law. And then in some cases, when they go to make an arrest and they encounter resistance of one kind or another, they have to apply force in order to make an arrest. They have to overcome resistance. And so law enforcement officers will take their cues from the elected officials and the leadership of their organizations on whether they're going to be supported if there's a highly controversial case. Typically now, it would be a viral video that's circulated on social media and that puts great pressure on prosecutors to bring charges against law enforcement. Well, other law enforcement officers will observe that closely. If they feel that they won't be treated fairly if they themselves are involved in a situation like that, then they'll be very hesitant to put themselves in that position. And I think that is what we're seeing. I think you alluded to it, but I think that's what we're seeing on a grand scale. And I think these officers are acting reasonably when they pull back a little bit. But I think when you multiply that across, the many, many thousands of law enforcement officers in our country, you do see the results in these crime numbers that you're referencing.
Absolutely, and it's a tough job. It's one grateful for the men and women who put on that uniform and go on the streets. And that's not to say that we don't gloss over the fact that there are some bad apples, but I think the problem, Jason, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as they make it more of a challenge to recruit good men and women to this because they're demeaning the law enforcement community, not standing with them, we're going to see more bad apples drawn into the lot. And I think it becomes a downward spiral.
Well, you're exactly right. And, we've been saying this all along that the strong effort by the far left to demonize law enforcement and to act as if law enforcement is the problem is going to result in an actual reduction in the professional standing of law enforcement officers. Many good law enforcement officers have elected to retire or seeking other career opportunities. Many, many fewer young people are interested in entering the profession because of how it's been portrayed and popularly by some media organizations and others. And so you're exactly right. At some point, these agencies will have to reduce their professional standards. Many already are doing that merely to meet the demand for staffing. And so you're going to have a bit of an ironic reduction in professionalism in law enforcement as a result of this movement.
Yep, situation only gets worse. Jason Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. Always great to talk with you. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you, sir. Good to be with you.
All right.